Hey, what is up guys? Tamir is here again with you to talk about confidence for kids and how to build it. So let's dive right into today's video, which we're going to talk about how to really develop, confidence, but more in the way of how can you really mess it up if you don't do the right things. So I've got a video for you today that talks about neglect theory and more stuff. So I haven't watched it yet, so let's watch it together and I'll let you know what I think about those theory and all the ideas and I hope tips that they give to parents how to develop their children to become more confident. So let's dive right into it.
Children who experience physical, cognitive or emotional neglect, say because their mother was sick and their father was busy, often face anxiety. As a result, their body produces stress hormones. If this happens a lot, these hormones become toxic for their developing brain, which then later can repress emotional and cognitive well-being for life.
That's true.
The real story of Daniel Rucarianu, who spent part of his early childhood in a Romanian orphanage, shows the full impact neglect can have. The story began in 1966 when Romania's then leader, Nicolae Ceausescu, wanted to make his country a world powerhouse and came up with laws to increase the country's population. Abortion and contraception were declared mostly illegal. While the law led to a rapid rise in birth rates, many of the poorer families were unable to take care of all their children, and Daniel and around 500,000 others were sent to state-run institutions. In most orphanages, there were no toys, no books, or anything else to stimulate cognitive development. Many kids just stared at the bare ceilings, waiting for their next meal.
That's horrible. Due
to the lack of human contact, some babies develop strategies for self-stimulation, such as rocking back and forth. The cognitive neglect often led to lower IQ scores, delayed language development, and a lack of creative thinking. This happens because our brains build connections with every new experience and stimulation. If there are no rich experiences during the first years of life, the period in which the brain develops the fastest, children cannot build the foundations necessary for optimal future learning.
Okay, so let's talk about this for a second, okay? I really believe in theory that has been proven quite largely about the neuroscience of our human development of the mind. So let's say that you have an infant and you don't speak with them at all, no language, during the critical years. Let's say those critical years are between 0 to 2. And if you start talking with him after year 2, because he didn't have any stimulation of cognitive understanding of language, then he won't be able to learn languages later. Why is that? So one of my teachers back in the academy told me that if you don't exercise, then your muscles just get wore off, and you can lose the ability to walk if you just sit all day, right? So the same thing goes for your cognitive abilities. If you don't focus on, let's say, learning how to speak, then it will become the body will throw it away, because whatever you don't use, you lose. Okay, that's a great philosophy as well. That if something in your life is not usable to you, your body will automatically just get rid of it. So that's why you may have lost some of your abilities in sports. Maybe you've lost some of your abilities to speak a different language because you haven't used it enough. But unlike some of the abilities, let's say becoming fit again, strength, or to speak another language after you've grown up, there are some things that are just potentially have to be done when you are young. Otherwise, it is impossible to overcome. So cognitive neglect is one of those things that can lead to a really terrible results, because you cannot rebuild something that has been lost for good. Okay, so that's also why I always tell parents that, yeah, your child can live on with his issues, let's say he has a hard emotional self-regulation issue, yeah, he can overcome that maybe in the future. But if you don't focus on it now and do something now, there might be some stuff that are gone forever. So cognitive neglect is the extreme of that, right? So you can see in the picture here, you have the brain who's trying to connect different neurocells. Like neurons are our brain's ability to make connections of understanding, of motion, of thinking. And if you just don't focus on it, then what happens is, just like on the top right picture, it's just getting lost, and eventually the body will get rid of any unnecessary abilities there are. And I really like this theory because most kids, if you give them hard, difficult problems, or to learn something really complex, they will be able to learn it because they have so much potential that hasn't died yet in their brain. So that's why I think that with my kids, I'm still not a father, but when I'll have kids, I will really put them in a lot of difficult situations, a lot of language consuming. So they'll hear Japanese, Chinese, Hebrew, English. They will hear a lot of languages, so they will develop their brain in a way that maybe will kill less of those potential neural connections. So think about that when you try to teach your kids something, and also think about that when you let traumas or something in the past to not be completely fixed, right? So that's a really big point. So don't let them miss out on life. Let's keep watching. Okay.
They miss out for life. Daniel lived with over 400 other children, and their shared bedrooms were hardly ever cleaned. The meals were mostly tiny portions of boiled cabbage, which the staff would sometimes steal to eat themselves. Some supervisors used violence to control the orphans. Others encouraged the older kids to beat Daniel, to humiliate him and exercise authority.
That's just...
The consequences of physical neglect and lack of basic nutrients caused most orphans to suffer from stunted growth. Some children contracted HIV and hepatitis B as a result of the reusing of medical supplies. The physical abuse caused severe bruising and other injuries. The overworked and undertrained staff hardly ever soothed the crying children. In fact, they barely spent any time with Daniel at all. Some children were left completely alone with their worries. Others hid their feelings from the very people who ought to protect them, since they feared being hurt. Emotional neglect and anxiety lead to an excessive production of the stress hormones known as adrenaline and cortisol, which is like poison for the developing brain. But the experience also distorted the children's understanding of love and human relationships. They learned to trust nobody, and as adults, often suffered from depression, insomnia, and social anxiety.
Okay. That's just completely terrifying. Just think about if you are a parent or you have some kids around you. Emotional neglect comes in all the range of the scale. So this is a very extreme usage of this emotional neglect theory. So basically what happens in the lower scales, maybe something that might have happened to you or someone you know, is when people are too busy to give emotional support. And I can say that I think my parents did a great job with me. However, there were times where they were focusing so much on their jobs that I barely had time with them. And when we had time, it wasn't always to soothe and to give the emotional comfort that I would have gotten if they would have worked less. Now, I came out right emotionally, I hope so, but some people don't because their parents just doesn't know how to soothe them because they have so little interactions with them and so little time and their energy to focus on their children. So when it comes to neglect, yes, in the extreme cases that might not even be related to you, you think, oh well, that happens to poor orphans that are stuck in those horrible conditions. But that also happens to almost 50% of the population that has some sort of emotional neglection, right? It doesn't mean that you're completely ignorant of your child, or that you don't care about him. You can care a lot but still do the wrong things. Let's say when the kid, I have one of my students that has really hard time expressing himself without using violence. So violence is the first way he goes to explain how he feels. And if his parents doesn't know how to handle it and how to communicate what happens, and just screams at him, don't hurt anyone, I'm so ashamed of you, stuff like that, that will develop emotional neglection if it's done in a really harsh way. So think about that the next time you try to communicate with your child or any child, and see whether you are really giving this child the emotional support, and by that means the connection and understanding that he needs. Because in the younger ages, it's really hard for them to figure out by themselves what is right, what is wrong. And if you can be this embodied of a role model, how to take care of your own emotions and how to take care of others' emotions, then there won't be this problems when they grow up to trust people or to take risks in life, healthy risks. And this is the way that I believe that can really transform people's life, if you give children the right soothing and the right connection and communication skills through the continued support of you. And if you don't know how to do that, make sure you go and ask someone who might does. It doesn't matter if they know or not. What really matters is that they can give you a new perspective, because we can't see most of the stuff that are wrong with us by ourselves in the mirror. No, you have to have someone objective come and look at you and tell you, wait, you're doing it wrong. That's what I'm doing with all of the parents I work with. I have to give them the specific points that they cannot see because it's out of their own vision. And that are the transcendence points for them as well. So remember that, and go ask someone help if you need it. Let's go watch again.
When Ceausescu's regime was eventually overthrown and the conditions inside the orphanage were shown on television, researchers from around the world came to examine the nameless children. MRI scans later showed that some had smaller volumes of brain mass.
Yeah, so smaller volumes of brain mass is exactly what the dying potential of the neurons in our head just goes away when we neglect things. So if let's say you just tie a kid's eyes so he can't see anything and he doesn't know that he can put it off and look, then his brain cells that are connected to the sight will completely tarnish. And that happens as well with cognitive neglect and emotional neglect. So yeah, the lower volume means that there is a lot of potential that has died and it cannot be reborn, or maybe it will be really hard to reform again.
The resulting research made a strong case that not only is nutrition vital to a child's development, but so is human contact.
Oh, that's a really good point, because part of the reason they lost the mass of those kids is probably because they didn't get any nutrition in their diet, right? But the second thing is the human contact, and a really interesting research that was done is when there was some children, it wasn't done ever on kids, but it was done on animals. So I think it was monkeys, that they put infant monkeys in a room and didn't give them anything to soothe them. So there wasn't any contact from other animals or from humans, and those infants died because of the lack of human contact. They did get food, they did get everything they need on machines and stuff, but you have to have that human contact. So what the research found is if you take babies and just put them in a room and give them everything with robots, then they will die because of the lack of human contact, and not because some biological other need, like let's say warmth or food. So that's a really big point. So the human contact, really important for human development. And it doesn't have to be from parents, but of course it helps a lot if it does. Let's go watch again.
To help the children, a large number were adopted into foreign families. But even after being adopted, many had problems forming loving bonds to their new parents. This aligns with the attachment theory and the notion that a child needs to establish a loving relationship with at least one primary caregiver early in life. Daniel was quite lucky with his family. While he continued to experience trauma and anxiety, he went on to have a university education, started a family of his own, and later he founded a non-profit organization for neglected children. If you grew up in a loving environment, count yourself really lucky. If you experienced forms of neglect, try to internalize the idea that it was never your fault, and maybe not even your parents' fault either. To read what we think can be done if you have ever experienced neglect, read the descriptions below. One way is to share your thoughts about neglect and how you think it affects you today.
Wow, so yeah, I'll put the link to the video down below. You can go watch it as well again if you'd like. And what I really want to say is what they said is amazing, because I think about the fact that there are so many people who has issues and they're even aware of the issues. That's the really big step. If you're aware of what's wrong with you, that means you're almost completely on your way to solve the problem. Because if you don't know what you're facing, it's very hard to face it. But if you know what you're facing, then all is left is to ask how. How do I overcome this? So I have parents, let's say, that comes to me and they say, I don't know what's wrong with my kid. I don't know what to do. I said, well, have you thought about it? What is wrong with your kid? And he's like, yeah, but you know, he's behaving bad. No, you thought why he's doing it? Maybe there is something in your behavior that needs to change. And some of the parents, they have this aha moment, like, oh, you're right, I didn't think about that. Wow, I mean, of course I knew that some of my behaviors probably affect the child, but I didn't know it was that point. And usually the people that comes to me that have, let's say, emotional regulation abilities issues, so those usually come from the lack of verbalization of emotions that the parents have neglected to do. So I tell them, next time you see your child frustrated about something, you are a grown-up man with healthy abilities to understand emotions. You need to tell your child what he's experiencing. Hey, I see you're scared from that thing and I want to help you with that. Or, hey, I see you're frustrated that your friend doesn't play with you. Let's find ways for you to comfort yourself. So stuff like that, some parents just neglect because the first thing, they don't know about it. They never learned how to be a parent. And second of all, maybe they have a lack of it when they were growing up. Or maybe they're just too busy with their job, with their stress, so they don't think about it. And they only react when the bad things happen, when the kid drops something, when the kid yells or hits someone. If that's the only attention they are receiving, of course they will have some difficulties. And it's our job as the caregivers for the children to really give them the right support they need. So whenever you have this issue that you see something in children, it's usually their environment, or it can also be something inside of them. Let's say they have some stomach issues, maybe even attention disorders or emotional self-regulation disorders that are just brain stuff, and you don't really have that much control over them from the get-go, and you can only improve them with medicine or with a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy or other types that can really affect the connectivity of the brain. But for most of all, remember that wherever you are, it's most important to remember to breathe. You can't survive without your breath. And if you breathe correctly, it will calm you and it will calm the people around you. If you can use that correctly, and I use that in one of my greatest interventions, the reset. So I tell the parents, breathe. And then we will figure out how to react to the situations and how to really take your child to the next level. So think about that whenever you're frustrated or triggered by the child. And also remember that neglection isn't only for the extreme with lack of nutrition and forsaken children. It can also be done in your house. So be very mindful on that. And I'll see you guys on your next video with me. And I hope you enjoyed it. Go check these people out in the link. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I will always help you. Train hard, train smart, and peace.